Hey, you. Yeah, you. The one staring at your calendar, realizing, this is it. Welcome back to Damn Parenting. I am your host, Eva, and, well, the school holidays are literally days away. And suddenly, everyone around you is in full Christmas mode. You've been planning the outfits and wrapping presents whenever you get a moment's notice, or the kids are in bed, or mentally, you're calculating how many mince pies might be too many mince pies. But then there's you. Because while everyone else can think about presents and festive pajamas, your brain just goes somewhere different, right? You're not thinking, what should I wear? You're going to probably be thinking, how's my child going to handle all of this? The change, the travel, the noise, the pressure, the family. And honestly, it's not an uncommon thought at all. I actually received a message from a listener a while ago that stopped me in my tracks because I know so many of you are quietly thinking the exact same thing. Let me read it to you here. Christmas is coming up and we'll be traveling to stay with family, which means a lot of time out of our normal routine. I've been thinking about how my child might handle a change, the travel, the excitement, and the pressure of big family gatherings. I really want to make this experience feel safe and manageable for them rather than overwhelming. I'd love some advice on how I can help my child stay calm, regulated, and supported through all of it. And, well, who else am I going to reach out to? So, to help answer this properly, and not the Pinterest quote kind of a way, but a real, practical, this works in a family living room kind of way, I'm joined by a resident child psychologist, Faye from Care Psychology. Welcome back, Faye.
Thanks for asking me to join you again.
Well, this question is not for me. This is definitely on you. So let's discuss it. From what I read out, this is not just a Christmas thing. This could be applicable to summer holidays as well, I'm sure. But how can we actually help our children stay calm, regulated, and supported through the madness of time changes, travel, jet lag, different routines, and aunts and uncles who just don't think about a child needs to also have quiet time?
It's a really difficult one to navigate, isn't it? Because there's just so many changes that happen over the festive period. And there's just so much to navigate and think about. And yes, we often feel a bit overwhelmed and dysregulated ourselves, don't we? So it's normal for our children to also feel a bit like that as well. I think one of the first things that I would mention is that I think we can get whipped up in Christmas stress. And actually, the more we feel stressed about Christmas and the more we feel stressed about the changes of plans and having everything perfect and ready, the more our children actually pick up on those emotions as well. So the more we can kind of take a step back and try and be calm and, approach things in a way that is regulated, hopefully, the more that can then be reflected in our children as well. But it's such a tricky time, and especially whether your child experiences difficulties with things like change, that can cause an extra layer of challenge as well, because naturally Christmas and the festive period brings lots and lots of changes associated with it, especially, as you say, if you're traveling, if you're going to big family gatherings they're not typically used to going to, if they perhaps offer different foods that they're not used to eating. There's lots and lots of different things. And also even a change to their normal schedule. So they're not going to daycare or school. So that's naturally out of kilter with what they would expect. There's perhaps a change in things like screen time, or maybe relaxing boundaries that you perhaps would usually uphold when you're in a typical routine. That perhaps, like things like sugar intake as well, is also one that over Christmas, children might eat a little bit more sugar than normal.
Oh, yeah.
Have an impact on their energy levels and their emotional regulation. So there's a lot to manage there, isn't there? And there's a lot to think about as parents. But one thing that I would say is that as a parent, you know your child better than anybody else. And you will be able to judge it in terms of what are they going to be able to manage? What changes are they going to be able to manage? And what changes are they not going to be able to manage? And what changes are they possibly going to find more difficult? And it's judging that. And what one child might tolerate might be completely different to what another child might tolerate. And I think it's so difficult, isn't it? And I know you mentioned about kind of traveling to go stay with family. And that, again, adds an extra layer of complexity, doesn't it? In terms of working on somebody else's schedule or staying in someone else's house where it's definitely not as familiar as your home environment. There's lots of different things, like the food schedule might be different. There's all sorts of things to navigate, and some things that children might just breeze through, but other things they might find more tricky. And I suppose it's picking up on what are the things that they're likely to find tricky and what are the things we can do to support them and what are the things that they might just breeze through and be okay with.
Yeah, I was thinking when the first time I was traveling with my daughter, it was a case of I was just prepping her, I think, just to talk about you're going to have this bed and you're going to be down here. And I just kept on trying to put a picture in her head of what to expect. And honestly, she just breezed through the whole thing. I felt like I didn't need to have done or wasted my time and my stress when it came to that.
The preparation is key, isn't it? And I think possibly she breezed through it because you prepared her for it and you talked her through these are the changes that are going to happen. This is what to expect. So that preparation was probably incredibly helpful for her to kind of prepare her in knowing how things are going to be different.
From a child psychology perspective, though, can you actually just give us a little bit of an idea of what actually happens in the child's brain and body when their normal routine disappears and everything becomes louder and busier and more exciting at Christmas?
I suppose there's a couple of different factors, isn't there? Because I suppose the festive period is naturally very exciting for children. And naturally, there's going to be big emotions there, not necessarily big emotions as in anger, but big emotions as in excitement. And excitement is actually often quite a big emotion that's hard to contain at times. And children can get quite overstimulated. So, yeah, there's that to kind of navigate a little bit. And I think that's where it goes back to supporting children to be calm kind of in those moments. And obviously, it's good to join them in that excitement at times, but also providing kind of calm, quiet times as well to support them to kind of like balance out those emotions a little bit. And I think kind of what you were talking about there as well is perhaps often children becoming quite overwhelmed by everything. Like if you think about something like Christmas Day, often there's lots of music happening. There's often more people around in the house. So there's much more sensory input, much more noise. Christmas lights. People might be wearing quite flashy or sparkly clothing. And yeah, it's a lot to take on board. Also, lots of different presents and navigating their response to those gifts, which at times can be quite difficult. And I know when my little boy was little, and we ended up taking days to open gifts because he just became so overwhelmed by them. So yeah, I mean, there are lots of different things to consider there. Overtiredness is often another one as well, especially if children are out of their routine. I know you mentioned perhaps being on a different time zone and things like that. And adjusting from jet lag is also another thing might be impacting their overwhelm and just general tiredness and less physical activity because often we're busy visiting other people and trying to squeeze in this and that, and they might not necessarily get the physical activity that some children might need to support them to regulate.
That's actually something I did not think about, but it is definitely playground period for us when it comes to Christmas that we need our little one to get out running around. One of the things I just wanted to address quickly from that question was the feeling of guilt or anxiousness before the trips, because they might feel that they're going to ruin Christmas for everyone in the household because you might have a baby who's up crying at 3 a.m. and you don't want to disturb your own parents or your brothers and sisters in the house. Or you have the toddler who just doesn't like the feel of the material that the bed they're sleeping in. How do you think you'd be able to help parents manage their own emotions so they don't unintentionally pass that tension onto their child?
I think it's finding a way that they can have moments of calm in and amongst all the chaos and the stress to help them to kind of take some time to manage how they're feeling or perhaps even just recognize how they're feeling to then allow them that space to then be able to respond as best they can in those more tricky moments. But it is difficult, isn't it? And I think especially when there feels like quite a lot of pressure around, particularly Christmas, and a lot of pressure to get things right or a certain way, it feels like a bit of a pressure cooker at times. And yeah, it is really difficult. Or just taking, especially if family members are around, if you feel comfortable, taking a bit of time out, for yourself or as a couple, perhaps, if you have that opportunity to be able to do those things that really work for you or help to regulate you or help you to be the best parent you can be, to respond as best you can in those more trickier moments.
That reminds me of a couple of years ago when we actually had an episode with Dr. Naomi where she mentioned that she was actually going out for a run. And it was a way to manage herself and her emotions. Because, like you just said earlier, we need to handle our own emotions because it can be passed on to our child. So I'm just trying to figure out, is there a way that we check in with our kid? Because there's always that 5 minutes in the morning before they go to school or daycare, 5 minutes when we pick them up, and 5 minutes at bedtime. Is there a way we could do that amidst the madness and lack of routine and complete noise that you think we could check in with not just ourselves, but with the kids?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a really good idea, doesn't it? And like when we were kind of talking before, you mentioned about maybe having a code word as well that maybe suggests a need, like a couple of minutes time out, where you and other people in the room perhaps know, I need to just take a couple of minutes for myself to regulate and then come back. And all those strategies are really helpful, aren't they? Especially when you notice that you're finding things a bit tricky, to be able to take that time away to regulate and then come back and, yeah, present as more regulated around the children.
And another thing I think many people are going to have a feeling about are how parents are meant to handle those big family expectations, family and societal, I guess. Things like, give everyone a hug or give everyone a kiss, or, everyone telling us, let their kids stay up late. They're super excited. They don't have to go to bed now, when your kid is really clearly overwhelmed. Do you think this is something we should let slide for the routine? Or do you think this is something we really need to tune into our kids to stick to a routine because we know them best, as you said?
I think this is something I feel quite strongly about. And my perspective on this would be, as you say, you know your child better than anybody else, and you know roughly what they can tolerate. And we are the biggest advocate for our children. And if you feel that something isn't going to work, or if you feel that you have to stick to a specific routine, or if you feel that something isn't going to work for your child, we're the ones that need to advocate for them in that moment and be clear in communicating with other family members that actually this is really important. Because ultimately, your child is the most important, or your children are the most important in this situation. And whilst it may be frustrating or perhaps a little bit upsetting for other family members if you've put a boundary in that they're not happy with, ultimately, the person who's the most important in that situation is your child. And they're going to be the ones that have big emotions, or they're going to be the ones that are finding it really tricky to manage. And then you're the one that's then going to be dealing with the fallout of that and trying to support them, when actually all of this could have potentially been avoided if you'd have kind of stuck to your guns and said, no, actually, this is really important. So I'll give you an example. I'm going back to the UK for Christmas, and I'm going to meet my dad's side of the family because we had the time change of an hour. My little boy is adjusting to not napping now. And I know that I've had to be really, really clear around when we can go and visit my dad's side of the family for a Christmas celebration. And from the start, I've said, yes, we can do this date, but we need to leave by 4:30. And I've been really, really clear on that. So then we can obviously think about, we need to make sure we're there kind of like quite a bit before that to have enough time to be there. But we do need to leave by 4:30 because it's an hour journey home. We need to wind him down for bed. And then we need to have him in bed really by 7:30. Otherwise, I know he's going to get so overtired, he's going to be overwhelmed, then he's probably not going to have a good night's sleep. And then that's going to have an impact for the next day. And not that anyone has had a problem with this plan, but be communicating from the start that this is what's really important helps to alleviate any tension around kind of maybe being there and then being like, oh, we've got to leave at 4:30, and then that people being like, oh, can you not stay a bit longer? So being really, really firm on those boundaries are really, really important. I was also thinking about, and I know you've kind of mentioned it in terms of speaking to wider family members or maybe them asking for a hug and our children not being massively comfortable with this. And I think it's so important to follow the lead from our children in this situation, because ultimately a lot of us, especially expat families who don't necessarily live near our wider extended family, for our children, some of the extended family are essentially strangers to them. And people coming up to them and speaking to them or expecting a hug is actually really big. It's like Pamela from finance coming up to you and being like, can you give me a Christmas hug, please? And how awkward would you feel if you'd only spoken to this woman twice before in your life? It's just a really odd concept, isn't it? That someone who you've only met twice before and you don't really know asking you for a hug. I think it's really important to take their lead, allow them to speak to family members when they want to. It's okay for them to be shy. It's okay for them to hide behind you. And yeah, don't force it. And over time, most probably they will come round and speak to people when they feel ready. But trying to force that just can cause some dysregulation and upset the children that I think we can avoid.
Well, I think I'm going to say this on behalf of all the parents listening is thank you for giving us permission to do that, because half the time it doesn't feel like it, because we're then being the ones making this decision and we're the ones being awkward. Whereas our friends and family are like, oh, come on, it's just fine. Whereas now this is a real child psychologist talking, and she is really telling us, listen to our child and let us be more aware that it's a huge experience for them. As she said, I mean, I'm not going to hug Pamela if I've only met her twice. I do have to say, you do actually remind me of another element to traveling back home, which I think you've already kind of answered there, was half the time as an expat or an immigrant, when we go home, we end up being the people in the cars driving around for several hours. And doing that with a kid, I think, is a huge expectation, because people are like, yeah, but you used to do it before the kid, so of course you can still do it now. And it's like, well, actually, now we've got a kid, we want to be a bit more calmer, and we don't want to have the kid in the seat in and out of the car for the next 3 or 4 hours for the next 5 or 6 days. So I think that's a great reminder as well, just to say planning in advance is also a great idea, just to sit down and say, hey, we want to do all this, but to do all this, this is what we're going to have to also do as well for the good of our child. And at the end of the day, we are the ones who are going to be suffering from the early wake up sessions that they're going to come into us saying, Mom, Dad, it's 5 o'clock. Let's get up and play.
Exactly. And I was just thinking, I know this is kind of like a aside to what you were saying there, but if you do have quite a lot planned, it's perhaps helpful as well to think about things like visual timetables or speaking to children about the plan so they know in advance, but also at the same time involving them in the planning to some extent in terms of what is it that you also want to do in this day. A really lovely tip that I was reading earlier actually was that if you are doing quite a bit of traveling and if you are going to a family occasion and you've traveled quite a bit first, go somewhere like a park for half an hour before you arrive. Let them burn off some energy, just have some downtime following that travel and then go to the family occasion. And that just supports that transition a little bit and also supports them in releasing some energy before they then have to go into perhaps an unknown environment where there's lots going on, there's lots of people and lots of people saying hello that they don't necessarily know or feel comfortable with.
I think that's a great tip. But before we wrap it up, let's take a moment to breathe, I guess. Thank you, Faye. Thank you for answering this question for one of our listeners. Because what we've learned today, I guess, is not about creating a perfect Christmas for everyone or just for our friends and family, but it's also not about controlling every moment. And I guess it's about understanding that our children aren't being difficult. They're just reacting to a big change. And we've talked now about the travel and noise and the overstimulation that sometimes we overlook as parents when it comes to our tiny little ones. The broken routines also can feel huge inside these tiny bodies. And we've also talked about protecting emotional safety. And it doesn't mean canceling fun. It just means slowing things down, creating small pockets of calm and giving children permission to feel what they feel. And this isn't just for families traveling. This matters if you're also staying here in the Netherlands and are hosting, because our houses also can become very noisy and the door could also keep ringing and your child suddenly has 10 people in their space and nowhere to breathe. these same tools are going to matter. And honestly, they matter for us too as adults, I guess, because you are allowed to be tired and you are allowed to need quiet and you are allowed to release the pressure to get it right. This doesn't just apply to Christmas, though. It's applying to any big family event, any holiday, and any trip where routines disappear and emotions rise. So if things feel messy, you're not behind. You're just responding to change in a human way. And that's enough. And like yourselves, I'm going to be taking a break from the new episodes every single Wednesday, but instead I am going to be scheduling next week some of our previous episodes, which will all be supportive from all different aspects of being a parent during the Christmas holidays. If you found this very helpful, be sure to share it with people who are going to be traveling home over the Christmas season or who are going to be staying here in the Netherlands. Everyone needs a bit of help in one way or another. And we have some great tips from Faye there, especially going to the playground before you go anywhere, or maybe before you're hosting your own party. The kids are not the people who are ruling the house, but the kids are the people who are going to have the biggest emotions. So if we can take care of them, we're taking care of everyone. For now, I'm going to wish you a very Merry Christmas, festive holidays, whatever you're going to be celebrating and however you're going to be celebrating. And I'm going to look forward to speaking to you all in the new year. Until then, take care.